Hey guys, Lucas from iExplore here, and today we're exploring Shiodome, which is one of iExplore's favorite spots, not only my favorite spot. So shout out to Stefan and Charles and even Axel, who's behind the camera. All of us regularly would lead the Tokyo Metropolis workshop that we run in this area. And those of you who've been to Japan and have taken this workshop will probably recognize some of the things I'm going to show you today in this video. The reason we like this area is it's basically a photographic playground. It's this amazing place where there's all this cool geometry and architecture and a little bit of people walking around that makes for interesting compositions where we can really break down the concepts into little pieces and teach them more effectively. So what I want to teach you in this area today is all about perspective and how focal length of the lens, especially of a zoom lens, affects or doesn't affect perspective. And hopefully you find this interesting. So we're going to jump right into it and learn all about perspective today.
iExplore.
All right, so we're going to talk about perspective. But before we do that, we need to define perspective and to understand what it actually is. And I think there's a little bit of misinformation out there, so let's define it. Okay, so perspective is kind of two components. First is the direction that you're looking in, right? So the angle at which you're looking. And the second is the position from which you are looking. So if I change where I'm looking from, the objects in the scene will have different relationships. Sometimes things are on the right of, each other, and sometimes they switch sides depending on where you're standing. That's perspective. So by changing the angle at which you're looking, or from which you're looking at the object, you're going to get a different perspective. The relationship between objects will change. Okay, so what happens when you zoom in with a zoom lens, or when you change a prime lens from a wide to a long one? Well, the lens changes the field of view, and on a side note, also changes the depth of field, but that's a different video. We're not going to go into that. So it changes the field of view, but that doesn't change the perspective because the relationship between the objects is still the same. All you're basically doing is cropping the photo in. If you zoom in from, say, this is a 24 to 70, if I zoom in from 24 to 70, I just get a narrower view of the same thing. Nothing really changes with the relationship of the objects. So, therefore, zooming does not change perspective. So when somebody tells you, hey, zoom with your feet, that's a little bit misleading because if you zoom, your perspective doesn't change, but if you move with your feet, your perspective does change. So it's really not the same thing. I get why people say that, and I tell people that too sometimes, just to encourage creativity. I've certainly said that on our workshops before. But strictly speaking, that's incorrect. You cannot zoom with your feet, because zooming is just changing the field of view. And moving with your feet changes the perspective. Okay? So the bottom line is, the focal length does not affect perspective. Or does it? All right, so now that we've changed our field of view, but not the perspective, because neither the camera nor the subject has moved, let me explain what I mean by zooming affecting perspective. So I'm going to reiterate before I get into some keyboard warrior battles in the YouTube comments. Strictly speaking, changing the focal length under no circumstances affects perspective. So that is a fact. However, the field of view of the lens does put some constraints, in my opinion, on the viable perspectives. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that if I'm shooting, say, on a 200 millimeter lens, there's only so close that I'll be able to get to a subject, even forgetting about how close I can focus. Let's say I can focus like infinitely close. It's a macro lens, it doesn't matter. But if I'm shooting on 200 millimeters, my field of view is so narrow that if I take a photo of a person from right in front of them, obviously I'm just going to see the tip of their nose and it's going to be a useless photo. Similarly, with a wide angle lens, if I want to shoot something really far away and show it really big in the frame, obviously I can't do that with a wide angle lens. So even though, strictly speaking, different focal lengths do not affect perspective directly, they do influence what you can do creatively at those fields of views. So they kind of indirectly influence your perspective because you're going to choose a different perspective case by case. Okay? And that's what I hope to demonstrate to you guys today, that the blanket statement of focal length doesn't affect perspective, that's misleading, is itself a little bit misleading because it's a little more subtle than that. Okay? So we're going to do a couple of different shots from here of the scene behind me that hopefully will demonstrate my point, where by using different focal lengths in conjunction with different perspectives, I can achieve different looks and different effects in my photos. Okay, so behind me, there's this really cool scene with this escalator and some interesting kind of geometric structures. And this is something, like I said, we've shot countless times on the Tokyo Metropolis workshop. Anybody who's taken this workshop over the last 5 years has shot this thing with one of our instructors explaining it. Today, that's gonna be you, kind of. You're gonna get to watch me do it. And the reason I like this example is because actually at this spot, I teach about perspective. Because I can stand at different distances to this thing, right? And by changing the distance, I can get a different perspective, right? So I'm gonna first start really close, okay? And I'm not gonna change my focal length right away. I'm gonna leave it on 24. See, I'm gonna be right here, right in the middle, okay? I'm gonna try to get everything nice and level. And by shooting from close here, okay, there we go. I'm gonna get a nice simple shot. Ideally, you know, when people come here in the workshop, I always want a person on the escalator, but I'm not gonna wait for each time I demonstrate for somebody to come. If somebody comes, great. Okay, so I did a shot at 24 millimeter, okay, from here. And then I'm gonna move closer because 24 is pretty wide. So I felt I was getting too much of the surrounding. I really want just like this bit, the diagonal, and then the horizontal bit up there. I want a simpler shot. So with 24, to achieve that framing, right, I have to get pretty close, okay? And so that's illustrating my point, is when I was farther back, I had a different perspective than I do from here. My framing was, you know, not ideal. It's not what I wanted. So I did what people say, I zoomed with my feet. But that also changed my perspective. The relationship of the objects is subtly different. It's not quite the same. And in fact, because I'm, you know, to get this framing, I have to aim up quite high, and everything kind of converges, right? So now I can think to myself, well, maybe if I move back, I'll get a better perspective. So we're gonna move really far back, okay? We're gonna move all the way back, 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 back. Because from all the way back here, I don't have to aim up so much. I can aim more straight on. Again, I'll get back in the middle just to keep it consistent, so always on this line. And so now from here, I can aim straight out at this thing, and I don't have to aim up to get the framing I want. The problem is with 24 millimeter, if I do that, I get all this space on the ground here, all the floor. I don't want that either. So what's the solution? The solution is to be far away and zoom in. So again, it's not this changing of the focal length that's affecting the perspective. What's affecting it is the fact that I move back. But what then, in conjunction with my position, allows me to get the framing that I'm after is the fact that I can zoom in. If I didn't have my 70 millimeter lens here, you know, 24 to 70, I only had a 24, I simply would not be able to get this perspective with a tight framing the way I want. Okay, so I'm gonna take one more now, and conveniently there are people. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit, actually 70 was a little too much, but it'll still prove my point. There we go. So I went out to about 50, in fact 70, and there we go. And now I have a very similar framing to the very first one that I did in terms of what's in the frame, but I see them from a very different perspective. So that's the full story, in my opinion, and that's the motivation of why I wanted to make this video, because I feel like there's not a full understanding of this, where there's like kind of people getting confused about, oh, like focal length does affect perspective, which is not true, but then there's the diehard people saying, well, focal length does not affect perspective ever. But in truth, the answer is more nuanced, and I think I've explained it. I hope I made it clear to you guys. So from here, I want to show you just a couple more examples. This was a very, you know, rigid example where we just move back and forth, and it's very concrete, right? Very obvious. But I'm going to show you some more specific examples. So let's come over here. And there is this glass surface just over here, which is great for reflections. And again, people who've taken this Tokyo Metropolis workshop and people who've shot with me or watched me shot know that I love this kind of stuff. Probably I take too many photos like this, but whatever. Never ends. What I like to do is put my camera like right on the glass and then shoot the reflection, because the canopy up there is really cool, and then you know, it reflects beautifully in the window here. Now the thing is, I'm going to do it on different focal lengths, right? In fact, I have a flip out screen on this camera, so I'm going to use that. Why not? Okay, let's take this off too so I can see better. And first I'm going to do it really wide, which is the way I kind of like feel I'm supposed to do this. This is the way it looks good. Okay. And then you see from the same perspective, I'm going to zoom all the way in, so the camera's not moving, And obviously, it's just not nearly as interesting. So if I had a 70 millimeter lens, I could argue that, yeah, sure, the perspective is the same as with the 24, but it's kind of unfeasible for me to shoot this scene the way I want to at 70 millimeter. So again, I come back to this idea that in a way, the focal length that I have available puts constraints on the viable perspectives from that are available, you know, at that focal length. So that's kind of how I look at it, right? So when I am out shooting, I'm considering what kind of perspectives are effectively attainable with a particular focal length, especially when I'm using a prime lens. So zoom lenses, you can just kind of say, okay, I want this perspective, so I'm just going to zoom to the focal length that gives me the field of view that I can get the perspective the way I want. But when I'm out with a prime lens, for example, we did the recent video about the 85 millimeter for street. Well, it puts constraints on the perspectives that I can get. So I kind of get in the mindset of that prime lens. And on a side note, this is why I think prime lenses are excellent for learning photography, because they force you to think in a particular field of view, which then puts constraints on the possible perspectives. And that's where zoom with your feet comes in. So that's what people mean when they say that. What they just mean is move around, because if you move around, you're going to have different perspectives and it's going to force you to think about the geometry. While if you just stand there and zoom without thinking, it's like easy mode. You don't really understand what's changing, okay? Once you master like a 24, a 28, a 35, a 50, and an 85, then when you use a 24 to 70 zoom lens, it's almost like a series of primes in your brain. It's no longer a single, like, just continuous thing. Now, from the same perspective, I'm going to shoot something else. To be honest, this would look better with a 200, but I don't have that today, so I'm just going to do it on 70. And it's those poles way up there. So from this position, those kind of decorative pillars look really good. If I get closer or to the left or whatever, it just doesn't work. Because from this exact spot, they all line up where I can see every single pole pretty evenly spaced out, you know, between each other. And that looks super cool, okay? So again, from the same spot, I know the camera changed position a little bit from here to here, but basically from the same spot, we have a perspective that works with a wide angle lens, the reflection, and a perspective that works at 70 millimeter, basically a telephoto lens over there, all right? So, yeah, I think I've explained myself very clearly at this point. If this was a workshop, this would be the part where I would say, do you have any questions about that? So if you do, put them in the comments below, okay? And I hope I gave you some ideas to, you know, some different ways to think about focal length, perspective, your position, and all that kind of stuff. It sounds very tedious. When I'm shooting on my own, you know, I'm just kind of enjoying and shooting, I'm not thinking about this so consciously, but by training these things very consciously over the years, it's become second nature to me, where I just kind of know what focal length I need and what perspective I need to achieve various results, okay? So I hope you do the same, get out there, keep shooting, and remember always, challenge your eye. Oh, hey guys, you're still here. Wow, you must be a huge fan of iExplore to watch all the way to the end of the video. We really, really appreciate that. That's a huge help because it makes our videos more popular because the YouTube algorithm cares about these kinds of things. But since I have your attention still, I hope you know that we do have a Patreon and also YouTube channel memberships. And if you sign up with either of those, you could get access to our Tokyo Photo Spot map. Also, if you're interested in any of the gear that I use in the videos or also some of the gear that we use to shoot the videos, all of the referral links for that stuff is in the description below. And if you click on those, that also helps us out immensely. Finally, we do sell some merch. We have iExplore branded t-shirts, and also on my own personal homepage, I sell prints. So if that interests you, again, links in the description below. But just the fact that you guys watched all the way to the end, we really appreciate. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.